Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about how to summarize research methods. Now, this is a task that comes up in lots of programs in ACU Online, whether you are talking about psychology, whether you're talking about education leadership, whether you're talking about nursing, sociology, or many other fields. Being able to look at how people have done research and understand what decisions they made and what advantages, disadvantages, limitations, and delimitations are entailed is an important part of understanding what the findings mean, how to apply or generalize them, and other things like that. So we're going to be talking about that terminology today, and don't worry if all those words don't make sense to you yet, because this assignment that we're going to be looking at is designed in part to ease students into the vocabulary and to acquaint you with, piece by piece, discovering what these terms are, what they mean, and what they are relative to each other. So, with no further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the assignment we're using as our focus today. So the assignment that we're looking at today is the Research Methods in Gerontology class from GRNO 352. And if we look at the instructions here, it says, okay, this assignment will introduce you to the academic literature and highest ranking gerontology journal, as well as help you see the variety of research methods that are used in gerontology research. Now, it happens that this specific assignment is asking you to look at one specific journal, but the principles are applicable with any field of research that you're doing, looking at so-called high-impact research, research that is important, that is read a lot, that has been vetted, and ideally is giving you information that is applicable to your situation. So if we were to just go ahead and open up this link here, that'll take us to the ACU Online Library. And as we open that, we'll find that we have to go through our login to access this resource. Not a problem. It might take a little while, but while it's loading, let's take a look at what it's asking us to do. To locate 10 articles and identify the research methods used in each article and briefly justify your response. Okay, now there's some details about kinds of things that you could mention there, and I will say as a general rule, when you see something mentioned as an example in the assignment instructions, take that as a requirement. They're so strongly suggesting saying, hey, this is a thing that you'll be graded on, I think you should study it, I think you should include it in the assignment, might be on the test, that kind of hint, hint, hint. Alright, now there's this note here that mixed methods articles, or articles discussing multiple cases, might use multiple research methods, and you need to include those. And there's going to be a little reflection on the diversity of research methods. Now, I'll tell you that the reflection is usually not something that people have trouble with. Locating the articles, usually not something people have trouble with once they've been given a prompt like a direct link here. It's this part where people go astray a little bit, so while we'll talk about the others, our focus is going to be on identifying those research methods and explaining what some of those things mean. So you can see here that the link to the ACU library has brought us right to the Journal of Gerontology, Psychological Sciences. And so we could browse this here, and we'd see a few things here. There is this editor's choice piece here. There is a piece on receptive language abilities. That's particularly interesting because I was actually just at a presentation related to this one here. But let's go ahead and look here, and we can see, oh, musical and multilingual experience are related to healthy aging. Now, I am a musician by practice, a vocation, sometimes vocation, and other such, and so I'm very interested in that. So we'll look at that, and then for the rest of our examples, we're going to look at a different journal here. Now, I want to point out that it says Journals of Gerontology Series B Social Sciences. And so we see here, all right, we are looking at, psychological sciences. So for the purpose of the assignment, I think you want to be in social sciences down here, because you can see that that is labeled as Series B, and under social sciences, well, this one is labeled as Series B because it is under psychological sciences. That doesn't sound like it's exactly what the professor is asking for. Now, again, for the purposes of demonstrating the principles, that'll work just fine for us, but make sure you're in the right subset of the journal. And there's some journals that have been around for so long that they have branched to have multiple series, multiple focal issues, and this looks like the case with the Journal of Gerontology, which is, as you can see from volume 78, it's been running for a good long time, and we have a whole lot more old people in the United States than we used to, so hence some of the splitting. Alright, so we're going to, again, for the purpose of our exercise, we're going to look at this article here. But before we read the article itself, we want to take a look at the abstract here. And what the abstract is a brief summary, emphasis on brief, of key aspects of this research that is documented in the article. Now, depending on the journal and the field, you might have this just written as one paragraph. You might have it divided, as you see in this section. If you're wondering why an abstract exists, well, back in the days when these journals circulated primarily or entirely by print, you would have these journals that would just list the abstracts of articles that had been published wherever, or books that had been published wherever that were related to the field, and they'd include the summary, i.e. the abstract. And based on that text, you would decide whether you were going to send away, which might involve international orders, might involve sending a courier or an agent or something like that, or finding the bookstore that held that thing, or a library that had it. And so before you went to all that trouble to get the copy, you wanted to know, is this relevant to what I'm doing? Is it what I think it is based on the title? And that's where the abstract text comes in. And even though most people are now accessing the journals electronically, that idea of having a very concise, terse, streamlined summary of the most important information has carried through. Now, we're not going to usually find the research design in the objectives. That's where we go to the methods here. And so often where people go astray is to look at this and say, hey, I'm looking for, is this quantitative, is this qualitative? And I don't see it there. This study must not be any of those. Or mixed methods, which combines both quantitative and qualitative. But we have here population-based cohort study. And what that does is, if you know what a cohort study is, that will tell you the general class or broadest type of research methods or research design being used, i.e. the methodology. Is it quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods? Quantitative involves things that you can count. Qualitative are things that are not easily reducible to numbers, like feelings, perceptions, impressions. And mixed methods is a combination of those two. So here we have a cohort study. And a good general practice to do when you see a term like this and you're not sure what it is, just do a quick Google search. Because if we search for cohort study, we'll see it tells us here, oh, the National Cancer Institute, which is a nice and authoritative thing, tells us, oh, it's a type of research study that compares an outcome in groups of individuals who are alike in many ways, but differ by a certain characteristic. Now, one of the seminal cohort studies is a study on smoking. And you're like, oh, okay, these people live in the same area, same background, but these people smoke, and these people don't, or these people smoked up to that point. And you'll find many different examples of that. But if we were to look at a list of different types of research, cohort studies are generally dealing with quantitative information, things that can be counted, like, did this person get cancer or not? Now, you can by all means read up on it, but a cohort study is telling us the general research design. If we look at this, we see population-based. Okay, that tells us about how they got these people and what they're supposed to represent. They're supposed to represent the larger population, rather than, say, people only live in this neighborhood or something. and we can see that they did some analysis about it. But back to that cohort study. Now, if you looked at the search history of someone who was experiencing this kind of terminology or encountering this terminology for the first hand, you might see them doing Google searches like, is a cohort study qualitative or quantitative? And you can see that is the first full result after the autocomplete of the word is done. So don't worry if that is your question. You can see lots of other people have asked that same question. Now, I mentioned earlier that it's a type of quantitative research, and you'll find that very quickly your search results will confirm that to you, or if you didn't know it already, will tell you. And so looking at this, how we would classify it, we can see before we've read it, just by looking at the first line of the methods section, we know this is quantitative research. It deals with things that can be counted. It is a population-based cohort study, and we can see that the study was using a questionnaire to gather the information, as opposed to using interviews or observation or something else like that. Now, if we're looking at some of the other things that come up here, you'll see that there are different ways that you can do a cohort study. In fact, internal comparison, comparison cohort, general population. Don't worry about that now. In future classes, you'll dive into that language here. But for our purposes, we see, okay, this is a quantitative research piece. It is specifically a quantitative cohort study. Almost all cohort studies are quantitative by their nature. And it's specifically a population-based cohort study. Now, you could say quantitative population-based cohort study, and that would not be inaccurate. But because cohort studies are generally, they'll say almost entirely, a quantitative research, a lot of people would say that's redundant to say, but you can say it used a quantitative research design, so that's the biggest picture, and specifically utilized a population-based cohort study. And so we get big picture and then the more specific details. All right, so let's back up here and look at another thing. And again, I'm going to look at the psychological sciences, not because you should do that for the specific assignment, but because it lets us talk about the kinds of things you would be doing without overlapping with the work that you yourself are supposed to be doing. So if we're to take a look at this different sources of sugar consumption and cognitive performance thing, that's an interesting one. I kind of want to read that one later. And as before, I recommend the first thing you do is look at the abstract. And we're not probably going to find it in the objective section. It's the methods, the shorthand for research methods, where we'll find what was being done. And we can see they used interviews, 24-hour recall interview. So they interview people and ask, what did you eat in the last 24 hours? Well, eat and drink in this case. And then we see that they had a way that they were analyzing it, and it looks like things were being counted. So seeing how things showed up on the word list, the substitution test, and that is definitely statistical analysis that you would use in a quantitative study. Now, while they haven't told us everything explicitly, let's go ahead and take a look at the article itself, which all I have to do is go to View Article. Now, here we see we can just download this as a PDF if that's helpful. Some people will use a split view. I personally don't like split view. Or we can use the navigation to jump around. And while I do recommend that each time you're studying an article that you save a PDF to your computer, because you might come back to it in future research on the topic, in this case, let's go ahead and jump to the methods section. And we can see that they were using data that was collected in this cross-sectional study of people using publicly available data. So cross-sectional, even though we're using secondary data that was collected by someone already for some other purposes, the fact that it's a cross-sectional study tells us that this is going to be quantitative. Now again, if you're encountering this for the first time, just do a search for cross-sectional study, and you'll see that, oh, it's observational study, so you're looking at the data at a single point in time. And then you can always look up this, quick peek to remind yourself or teach yourself, oh, yes, it is quantitative. Now, the non-experimental, what that means is that they're not going in and changing things. They're not saying, oh, you're eating this, please stop, have this other thing to drink. It's not an intervention. It's not an experiment. They're just looking at things at one point in time, and saying, okay, so this is what we see there. This is what we see there across this slice of society. Now, if we look at this, we see that they were using the NHANES database here, and that is supposed to be looking at a representative sample. So when they gathered that data, they're saying, okay, we want this to be representative. And you can see that there's a lot of people whose data is in this set there, because even after they removed all this stuff, they still had almost 2,000 people's data. And you can see that they even show you here in this diagram how they narrowed down those numbers by using these different exclusion criteria. So that's very helpful that they have given us that detail. But going back to this, so cross-sectional study was conducted, or analysis of the data collected for the cross-sectional study, which will in its end point also mean that we are doing a sort of cross-sectional study. Focused on a subset of it, but again, using cross-sectional data. And if we look at this assignment here, it says, identify the research methods used in each article and briefly justify your response. So by explaining what they did, if you say, oh, they used a quantitative, cross-sectional study design, okay, well, what did they do that meets that description here? Well, we can see here that they used secondary data. Again, that's data that was collected by someone else, by the Centers for Disease Control. It's publicly accessible, and that's how they collected it. So that's how we know what the data is before we start narrowing down, I think. And you can see that the data for that was originally collected using interviews at home and then a health examination in this mobile medical unit that was going around. Now, if we're looking at this, we can see that there's a lot of demographic data, some things about symptoms and patient history that were used to do that. Going back and looking at this, see, okay, what were the procedures used? Oh, the procedure for collecting data, if we look at this, we see, all right, the sampling method for getting the people that the data was collected from, multi-stage probability cluster sample design in the original collection, and that the data collection there was being done through home interviews and an examination, this mobile examination center. All right. Now, if we are looking at something like this, so what you don't want to do, a common mistake that people often make, is to include non-important information, or information that, while important that took place, is not really important in the context of discussing the research design. So the fact that the participants provided written informed consent, that is a basic requirement for any research conducted by the CDC and by any federal funded institution, and any institution that is following current guidelines on research ethics. So mentioning that should be happening everywhere. If it wasn't happening, yes, mention that. But the fact that it's happening here, probably not worth mentioning in your summary here. Now we have this table here that they have suggested, so you can absolutely go ahead and use that. In fact, let's go ahead and grab that. So I have downloaded this file here, and if we're looking at it, we see, okay, article reference format. Well, if we go back to the article here, at the top we have the Cite button. So click on that, and it lets us select the format. That's for downloading it. You could copy and paste it here. That will get you the information, but it's not an APA style. So here's something else you can do. You can go to the ACU library catalog directly and search for this title, let's do that. Alright, so we have the title here. We're going to copy that, and just on the library page we're going to paste in that title and do a search. Now, most of the time, even if it's not in quotation marks, most of the time the article you search for, assuming it has a medium to long name, will come up as the first result here. And here, if we click on this Cite button, it'll give us a variety of different ways to format this. Now, it's not perfect, but it's good enough, and it saves a lot of time here. So here we have this information here, and looking at it, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things to change. Now that may sound like a lot, but watch how fast it is. So I'm just going to select this, copy, and then paste into the Word document. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is set that to match destination formatting, and then I'm going to delete those bullets. Now, you could resize this if you wanted. Just for convenience, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so that we can see it more clearly. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. First, this numbering the different authors, that's not something you do in APA style, so we'll just take that out. And here, the title here of the title of the article should be in sentence case in the references list. So we'll go ahead and change that. Now, data, that's the first word of the subtitle, so that's capitalized. And this is a proper noun here, so this is capitalized. Now, when a journal starts with the journal or the journals in APA style, you drop the, so take that one out. And here we have the page range. You can see that that's just a data entry error. And the last thing is that this link will only work for someone with an ACU account. But if we just replace this string with the period, then we have a link that will show anyone where the article lives now, and then they can access it through their library or other system of choice. So that's a reference. If we're going to be extra specific, we'd want that to be indented a ½ inch for every line past the first, but that's usually not something we include in the table because it takes extra space. But if it's in your reference list, you would have that hanging indent. Okay, so now we are writing this up. What's the research method used? Well, let's revisit that. What was that thing that we're looking at? We see that, oh yes, that was a Remember, we know from the analysis that it's involving quantitative research, but what's the specific one? Well, we go down to the detailed methods section, not the one in the abstract, but the detailed methods section, and we see, oh, okay, it was a cross-sectional study. All right. Quantitative cross-sectional study. And what's an example of it? Well, they were using different types of data, and for looking at that data, we don't want to spend too much time on the study population. We want to look at, oh, they were using a trio of cognitive performance assessments. All right. And you can format this a variety of different ways, but because there are 3 different things, it's often helpful to format it like that so we see, oh yes, 3 different things. Now, you could look at the variables, you could search for that, but given this, that they're using these 3 tests here, that is fairly specific. Now down here we see talking about the different variables that they looked at. And you wouldn't want to just copy and paste all of them, but talk about them in general. So we have here, for example, a bunch of demographic variables. We have some about their body, some about their diet, some about their history, and you can classify those and so report them in broad categories. Okay, so let's go look at another example here. So we're going to use the same journal here. And let's go ahead and take a look at this article on loneliness. Loneliness is a great problem of our age. And if we look at this, we see, oh, it says examine the longitudinal association. Now, we have this study that they were taking data from, but if we really want the specifics, let's go ahead and look at the article itself. So view article, and as you saw before, we can use this shortcut here to get to the method section here, and we see, okay, they were using secondary data from the social relations study, and we see that, oh, yes, they reported their health on a 5-point scale. Well, that's something, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that is countable. So definitely quantitative. I mean, you can see this question here. How often? 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, again, can be counted. So quantitative. And yeah. So now if they had asked, oh, name 3 words to describe how you feel, that is qualitative data. But this is quantitative. This is something that is very easily reducible to numbers and analyzable in terms of numbers and frequency and such. So if we were going to be describing this, we can talk about how this is a study that it gave surveys, or the original data was collected using surveys. And let's go ahead and see if we can find some qualitative research. And I'm just going to go ahead and search for qualitative to see what comes up here. Now, when you are searching for something in particular, because you're looking for, say, doing research of that type, you might use a more specific term to describe a particular qualitative methodology, like grounded theory, perhaps, or phenomenological inquiry. Now, here we have, how dementia affects personal dignity. It tells you in the title it's qualitative. Oh, let's take a look at this. And we see this is actually a qualitative cross-sectional study. Usually they're quantitative, but this is an exception. So pointing out that it's qualitative research, it was specifically a cross-sectional qualitative study, is actually useful here. And they're talking about feeling dignified. And that is something that is hard to convert into numbers. So yeah, that makes great sense why they would have. Now, let's recap what we've looked at. We've looked at how to seek out and identify a journal article. We've looked at how to look at the abstract and read that for details. We've looked at how to use the citation button in the ACU library catalog to save us some time transcribing or adapting the text. We've looked at how to look up different research terminology that we're not familiar with and the basics of quantitative and qualitative research. And we've also looked at how to start putting that information into a table. So with that, I think that's a good point for us to stop here, but let me first highlight some different webinars that you might be interested as well. If you are interested in learning more about research terminology, well, it turns out that we have webinars already recorded that you can watch about qualitative methodologies, including the most common types, quantitative, including the most common types, and mixed methodologies. So if this is something that you would like more information on in a structured format, by all means head to our Writing Webinars page and take a search for methodology, and that'll bring you right to these ones here. That's a good pausing point for today. So if you have any questions, feel free to give us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, to go to my.acu.edu to schedule an appointment. Just select from the drop-down of resources or quick links, select the Online Writing Center and follow the instructions, or you can head straight to our website for more information, to download copies of our course paper template, to access webinar recordings, and other information. Have a good night.